Metropolitan Chicago is one of the most religiously diverse areas in the world, and for more than a half century, Sanctuary has reported and reflected on our faith-filled community. Sanctuary tells stories of faith from both inside our houses of worship to the streets and neighborhoods where faith is acted out every day with acts of kindness and concern. From food pantries to peace initiatives, from worship services to servicing the poor, Sanctuary has a proud history of reporting on the goodness that flows from our faith traditions. Watch Sanctuary every Sunday at 12 noon on the Live Well Network.
I'm sorry for your loss. That's what well-meaning people say. I'm sorry for your loss. But when another precious life has been cut short by gun violence, sorry isn't enough. Sorry doesn't begin to soothe the grief caused by senseless violence. Nothing can. But there is another word that may have the power to begin the healing process. That word is action.
Welcome to Sanctuary, bringing you conversation and stories at the intersection of life and faith. This edition of Sanctuary is produced in cooperation with the Council of Religious Leaders of Metropolitan Chicago.
Hello, I'm Reverend Jackie Marquez, Chaplain at Northwestern University. Welcome to Sanctuary. Today on Sanctuary, we'll talk about the efforts by the Council of Religious Leaders of Metropolitan Chicago to reduce gun violence. Joining me for this discussion are the Reverend Dr. B. Herbert Martin, President of the Council of Religious Leaders of Metropolitan Chicago, and Mr. Nisan Chavkin, Executive Director of the Council. Welcome.
Thank you.
As religious leaders in the city of Chicago, I think that unfortunately, as many of us have had to respond to vigils, for example, for gun violence in the city, there's almost a sense of it's becoming almost routine. Tell me a little bit about your work and experience of responding as a religious leader after an incident in the city.
Mm-hmm. Well, certainly we've made your remarks, that I'm sorry, for your loss, and then a number of prayer vigils and so forth. We recognize that whereby words of comfort and support in the time of that kind of tragedy is important. However, that's not enough, and so the council, over the last year or so, have made violence, but gun violence in particular, the core value, for our actions and activity. Yeah.
Nisan, share a little bit about your experience as a religious leader on site in responding to recent incidents in the city.
Well, I'm not a religious leader, but I have attended too many vigils too many times. And in fact, at the last vigil, which was for the massacre in Christchurch, New Zealand, I went, and it was a very beautiful and moving service, but our host opened it and said, well, here we are again. And truer words were never spoken. We know exactly what to do when there's a massacre in a religious space. We know exactly what to do when a school is attacked. We know exactly what to do when a workplace is shot up or the weekend death toll comes in from violence on the streets of our city and in our communities. And truthfully, gun violence seems to be pervasive in our community and in this society. There is no place right now where you can be that you are, quote, safe from gun violence. It happens in every venue and every age, in every economic, social setting. It's all over the place. And so the council said there is an opportunity here for religious people to help other religious people think of this issue in terms of the values that they hold dear and to act on those values.
Moving, from the comfort, and the feeling of empathy and sorrow, for someone who's experienced that kind of loss, moving from that space to the space of action is always the challenge. And it has to go beyond, quote, religious leadership into local communities, to the grassroots level, where people are actually feeling the hurt and needing the change to happen. So we've put together a couple of initiatives by which we are now moving, and Nisan can speak a little bit more on the details of this, where we are moving the conversation into the local congregation to educate the people in the local communities of how we can organize and deal, with the question of gun violence. Yeah.
Before you share a little bit about the initiatives that the council is developing, set the stage for us a little bit around what the core value, what the moral underpinning is that is shaping the work of the council and shaping the initiatives.
Sure. Well, the council is made up of virtually all the major traditions in this city, which means most of the major traditions in the world. Everyone is here in Chicago. So we're from Anglican to Zoroastrian. Everybody's at the table. And every one of those traditions believes in the sanctity of human life. And every one of those traditions is appalled by the senseless death of the innocents. And so those are tenets that guide our work, and we thought surely these are tenets that are espoused in every congregation, wherever they meet, whatever day they meet, in our city and in the region. And we thought there's a place we can help people tap into their teachings in the way that they express their faith and allow them to energize that commitment and say, okay, this is something about this is an issue that speaks to our values that we can move forward and do something about. And that's what these conversations are designed to do, is really to do a lot of listening with religious leaders, and then, as President Martin said, to go into congregations and let people speak for themselves and make their own connections with their tradition and this issue.
Yeah, and I think what Nisan is saying is very, very important, is that we are not coming with the answer, but we are coming to join the communities in helping them to seek and solve their issues with gun violence. I think one of the challenges, as I was saying earlier, is to move this conversation from the, quote, leadership level to the community level. And the initiative that we have in moving conversations into congregations has been very successful so far. Much remains to be done, but there's great progress that's being made.
With the frequency of these incidents, whether it's locally or globally, in addition to, as you mentioned earlier, sort of folks getting used to knowing how to respond to these, whether it's as religious leaders or not, there's also this danger, I think, of compassion fatigue for those that are on the front lines. Can you speak a little bit to that, to this compassion fatigue or the danger around it, and how do you avoid it or refresh yourself after this?
One of the, I guess for me, one of the scary things is to become accustomed to hearing of violence and guns and shootings and so forth, that you almost lose the feel, of this. So to keep yourself mindfulness, and to be able to speak out against it then and there, and to help people to move to a place of action, and don't become insensitive, to it, because you can hear it so much. Just this week, one of the deacons in my congregation, he lost his oldest son, shot in the head right on his doorsteps. And you hear it so much until it's not enough for me to say to him, I'm so sorry that you felt that way. But the next step is how do I move to the place where I can get that brother, that father, that parent, not just to grieve, but allow that grief to take place, but how do we work the grief out? How do we solve, take an action step, for it?
And affirming the fact that it's just not, this isn't normal. I mean, this is not a normal state of affairs, that we are making all these steps. My congregation, which is up in Evanston, where we have a murder problem just like the city of Chicago has. We're a smaller city, but we have murders, and it's terrible. Where all of our area faith congregations are taking steps to fortify themselves, where the President of the United States urges all of our congregations, 250,000 congregations across this country, to all employ security guards. That is not normal. That is not armed security guards. There's another way. And we don't have to live like this. And we can, part of maintaining, avoiding compassion fatigue, I think, is helping us remember that there is another way. And there's a hopeful way. There's a better way. It's in our teachings. It's in the teachings of each tradition saying, this is not the way. This is, if you believe you were created, we weren't created for this. And we have a choice. And let's choose differently. Let's choose life.
Yeah, and what we're also saying is that it's almost like a two-track program or plan that has to happen. We are grateful, for law enforcement and legislation, that's being passed and trying to work for common sense gun laws and so forth. But we recognize the legislation is not enough. Sensible gun laws, though vitally important they are, it's not enough. So there has to be this moral underpinning, to it, because we recognize that the bottom line is that it's not the gun itself, it's the individual with the gun. So how do we begin to change some of this romance with guns and weapons and so forth? So the moral issue and the legislation have to go together.
Highlight some of the initiatives that the Council is developing and that you would like to share with the community.
Well, we are, as I mentioned, we're trying to, as President Martin said, we're not here to, no one needs their preacher coming in and being an expert overnight in gun violence, right? I don't think people go for, that's not why they're part of that community. But they do look to their congregation as a home and as a place for conversation on core values that they all share. And so helping, listening, first of all, as a council to religious leaders across the city to see what is their experience with gun violence, how is it affecting their community, how is it shaping their congregation, what issues are they facing. It's important for people to have a chance to speak about their own experience and to be heard by other people in the neighborhood and to be heard by this council. And second, it's critically important to have people in congregations, so part of it is that listening. The second phase of this effort is to build on the strength of the council, which is working in interfaith settings and working in an interfaith capacity and helping congregations have those conversations about, okay, how does it tie into our beliefs and what do we as a congregation choose to do about it? What is our action plan going to be? And that process is twofold. First of all, these conversations will be facilitated by an interfaith team from the council. For whatever reason, it's helpful to see that other people who aren't from your tradition, who are different from each other, there to talk with you, and you're all talking about the same thing. And you all have that same value. And it's immensely affirming to say that if I'm in a church and a Muslim walks in and a Hindu walk in and they care about the same stuff I do. Wow, that's important. And second, it's important for each congregation to decide its path because there's so much that can be done. And some are going to be focused on raising awareness in the congregation. Some may focus on caring for victims. Some may focus on policy down in Springfield or in Washington or at City Hall. Whatever they choose to do, we know that because there's people out there who've been working on these issues for many years, there's a resource for every one of the solutions they want to do, and we can tie them into that resource. But they must choose their path because then it's theirs, and whatever they do will be good because we're all then coming from these different places to address this problem.
Yeah, and it is going to take all of us together, the total community, government, business, of course, the religious community, the educators, all of us together have to own our part in this discussion. And then for those of us who hear violent language and violent rhetoric, we must take responsibility in terms of how we speak to each other, how we speak to others, because sometimes violent language and rhetoric leads to violent outbursts. So all of us got a job to do.
How can the religious and non-religious work together around this issue?
It's a good question. The council has been a member of the Illinois Gun Violence Prevention Coalition since, I think, close to its start. And that coalition is composed of all sorts of organizations. It's organizations that are entirely secular, policy organizations, faith-based organizations from particular traditions, as well as interfaith organizations like the council. And together, we all sort of have a common thing that we are trying to advance, which is to reduce gun violence. And this is a great opportunity to show that in a diverse society like Chicago and a diverse country like America, that even people with all these different backgrounds, you can find something in common, work on a core value that you all embrace, and advance together and learn how to make your neighborhood, make your community, make your country better.
Thank you both for what you've shared with us so far. There's more to come on Sanctuary after this short break.
Metropolitan Chicago is one of the most religiously diverse areas in the world, and for more than a half-century, Sanctuary has reported and reflected on our faith-filled community. Sanctuary tells stories of faith from both inside our houses of worship to the streets and neighborhoods where faith is acted out every day with acts of kindness and concern. From food pantries to peace initiatives, from worship services to servicing the poor, Sanctuary has a proud history of reporting on the goodness that flows from our faith traditions. Watch Sanctuary every Sunday at 12 noon on the Live Well Network.
Welcome back to Sanctuary. I'm Jackie Marquez. We're speaking today with representatives from the Council of Religious Leaders of Metropolitan Chicago, Reverend Dr. B. Herbert Martin and Nisan Chavkin. Pastor Martin, Nisan, can you share a theological teaching or scripture from your tradition around nonviolence that keeps you motivated for this work?
Wow, there are so many. I think for me, from a pastoral, standpoint, comes from the Beatitudes of Jesus, when he talked about peace and peacemakers, as well as how we bring comfort and support, to those who are hurting. Blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. And I think it's the role of the religious community in particular, to bring that comfort not only to the individual congregants, but also to the city, to speak to the city in such a way where we can move them beyond fear to action. And so that's sort of the scriptures that inform my work as I go each day, out there.
I find motivation in a story. It's relevant to this time of year for Passover. And it's a story of the children of Israel in the land of Egypt. And it says that they groaned mightily under the oppression of the new Pharaoh. And at that point, God hears their groans. And to me, that says that you have to be at a point where you are tired of suffering, tired of things as they are, and you no longer take it. And you're ready to say, I am ready for something else. I am ready for freedom. I am ready for a different way of approaching things. And to me, that is a very important signal that we as a community, I think for a long time, have just accepted gun violence as the way things are. And it doesn't have to be that way. That's what getting out of Egypt means. That means that we can live a different life. And that's where I draw inspiration.
Yeah, and then for me, the love for justice, peace, and beyond that is the love for righteousness, to see that right prevails. And it is not right to adjust ourselves to gun violence. It is not right to take life, which raises the real moral question, the respect for life, and the respect for the eternal creator of us all. So the struggle for righteousness, I think even greater than justice, is what moves me most.
We've talked quite a bit about the victims of gun violence, but we know that there are survivors, many of them, often the families or friends of the folks that have died, who are left with the aftermath of the violence. Can you speak a little bit to your experience of working with survivors who are often, after the cameras have left, after the vigil is over, are left to try to figure out a way to move forward?
Are shattered. I mean, the truth is that the killing doesn't stop once the person has been murdered. We've spoken with, there are many parent organizations, survivor networks. I'll mention two, Moms Demand Action and Purpose Over Pain, both active in our city, with whom we've spoken, and people who struggle with, why do I continue after losing a child? There was a little girl in my community in Evanston who came to birthday parties at my house, and a friend of my daughter graduated in the same class, who was murdered here on the South Side. And my daughter called in the middle of the night and woke us up sobbing and telling us that this had happened. And her family, this little girl's family, fell apart afterwards. Her mother died within a year. The killing doesn't stop when the bullets stop. The ripples and effects on those who survive is just terrible. We've seen it in recent months with people surviving Parkland who subsequently took their lives because they just couldn't go forward. That's not right. We can change that. We have an obligation to change that.
Yeah, the collateral damage that's done, that ripples long after the cameras are gone, the bullets have stopped flying. The damage, done to, not only to children, but also to the grandparents, the aunts and uncles. I mean, there's a rippling effect, for it. Hopeful, yes, but beyond hope, what? And I think that's where the moral leadership needs to step up in a very assertive way, and to begin to move beyond the comfort, beyond the prayer vigils, and put the action plans together, which of course means law enforcement and legislation. So we got to push hard for that to make that happen. But understanding that law enforcement and legislation is not the total answer, but it's a good beginning. If the religious community, or when the religious community really comes to the place where it will step up and in a very assertive way say, we're for righteousness in our land. Yeah.
Where is the hope?
The hope for me, lies with these conversations that we are moving into the local communities, and the wonderful response of the local residents. The hope for me is mothers who purpose over pain, that in spite of the grief, the sadness, the horror, the fear, they are bodacious enough to take a stand and say, enough is enough. Yeah, those are signs of hope for me. The sign of hope for me also lies at the political level, that politicians are becoming more aware of their responsibility to speak to this and to do something about it. And in jest, I heard in the last election, which was a very historical thing, that light has come to Chicago. So let's go with the light.
I think the hope does come from ordinary people who start to say and work together with their neighbors to say, we are going to do it differently. And I think, as President Martin said, it does show up in our political life because the laws are essential. And people elected to office respond to what their constituents are saying. And we are seeing across the country movement because people are saying it. And they're saying, we are tired of the status quo. We would like to make some changes. We see reasonable things that we can do to make our country safer and wiser and support the values that everyone says they believe, and I believe that they hold to be true. Our lives are important. Our lives do matter. Children and other people deserve to be safe and to be outside to play. That's not a fantasy. That's something we should, that's a realistic thing towards which we should aim. And we can get there if we decide that we want to work there together.
Yeah, and the new energy that came to Congress, you know, and the excitement that we hear coming out of the halls of Congress with the new representatives who come in, and the very positive language that we're hearing around issues of violence, of course, but the empowerment of the feminine gender, I think, is a sign of great hope, for us.
We began the program talking about moving from sorry to action. What would you say to our viewers who might say, I don't know where to start, I don't know where to begin, what do I do, how do I contribute?
I think there are two things that we can do. First of all, we do have the virtue of living in the information age. And there are many organizations devoted to various issues relating to gun violence and reducing it that we can access. And they are all over our communities. They can certainly call the council and we can direct them as well. But they are more often than not right there in your own town with nonprofit organizations and service organizations devoted to that. And the second is they can turn to their congregation. Every congregation I know, all across the denominations, they have a social action or a social justice or a justice committee that is concerned, or a peace committee. Well, okay, that's a place to start and say, I'm concerned about this question. I want to do something where our congregation can find something to do together. That's a place to begin. And whatever happens there can move us forward.
Yeah, and within families, where we begin by teaching children peace, respect, and compassion. Because within my own household, my children, my grandchildren, my great-grandkids, they don't always agree. But how do we teach them to settle their issues? Should it be combative, or should it be argumentative, or should we find ways in which to peaceably resolve things without resorting to anger, outbursts, and so forth?
Or guns.
Begin at home. Yeah, guns, indeed. By all means,
by all means.
It's best not to have the gun at all, but if you got it, please put it away.
Reverend Martin, Nisan, thank you for your ongoing work, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Jackie Marquez. Thank you for watching Sanctuary.